Chapter 1. The Dinner Blueprint. They said I wasn't wife material. They measured my worth by the shine on their silverware and the silence I could keep at their dinner table. That night, while their chandelier hummed above me like judgment, I realized something: they weren't evaluating me. They were exposing themselves. I'm Elena Vargas, an architect who builds spaces that don't require permission to enter. And that evening, when his mother smiled and told me I wasn't effortless enough for her son, I decided I'd draft a new kind of blueprint, one where their son would someday work for mine. I used to think the quietest room in the world was a library, after closing rows of books, exhaling the day. I was wrong. The quietest room is a dining room full of people who have already decided who you are. That night, I wasn't there as a guest. I was an exhibit. I designed spaces for a living, but I could feel myself being measured like one: height of manners, color of ambition, load-bearing grace. Ryan said his family's home in Santa Barbara was classic, not flashy. I should have remembered that when wealthy people say classic, they usually mean controlled. The Wilmore estate was exactly that: controlled silence wrapped in money's good taste. Thick carpets that swallowed every step, drapes that turned the ocean breeze into a sigh, a chandelier that glowed like diplomacy. Even the air smelled expensive lemon polish gardenia and something cold like silver left in the rain. A photograph on the entry table stopped me. Ryan, at 8 years old, missing teeth, holding a sailboat. The frame was sterling. The smile was real. Welcome. Vivian Wilmore extended both hands as though conducting a ceremony. Her voice was soft but perfectly aimed. She kissed the air near my cheek. We're thrilled to meet the woman who drafts our son's future. Drafts. I smiled because it was a clever word choice and because my father always said you never lose by being gracious. Mom, Ryan said, trying for warmth that felt a degree too practiced. This is Elena. Of course it is, she said, as if there'd been any doubt. Her daughter Chloe arrived a few minutes later, phone in hand, haloed by the light of her own front-facing camera. She gave me a look that started at my shoes and ended at my earrings, then filed me somewhere between harmless and invisible. "Hi, love your jacket," she said brightly. "Thanks," I answered. "It has deep pockets for tools." She blinked. Tools? Tape measure pens, architect problems. Dinner unfolded like choreography. A server appeared every 7 minutes with something that looked too beautiful to eat and too small to fill you. The conversation, light and brittle, ricocheted around the table: finance updates from Uncle Warren, vacation plans, someone's remodel in Montecito. I listened, nodded, performed interest. When Ryan steered the spotlight my way, Elena just finished a community center project. I talked about daylight harvesting and porous pavements, about how old neighbors cried when the skylights opened for the first time. I waited for warmth that didn't come. "Where did you study?" Chloe asked after the halibut, leaning on the word study as though it might buckle. Cal Poly for architecture, then Columbia for my master's. Public undergrad, Vivian said thoughtfully, the way a jeweler appraises a stone. But Columbia is lovely. Great professors, I said evenly. I learned to design with the tide. How poetic, Uncle Warren murmured, reaching for salt he never used. Ryan's smile flickered like a candle in a draft. He tried to guide the talk back to safer ground, our vacation, our plans, but every question circled class and comfort. Vivian waited until dessert, then touched the rim of my plate with manicured fingers. "You have a solid career, Elena. That's rare." "But marriage in our family is a partnership of equals. We've always imagined someone with a certain polish." For Ryan, a delicate pause. "You're not exactly wife material." My fork stayed still. My pulse slowed the way you ease a car before a curve. I set down my napkin and smiled the professional smile that hides structural stress. I appreciate direct language, I said quietly. It saves time on demolition. The silence that followed could have been framed. Then Chloe laughed high and sharp because laughter is the cheapest plaster for an awkward wall. After dinner, Vivian invited me to the balcony for air. The Pacific below moved like a sleeping thing. She stood beside me, shawl over her shoulders, voice gentler, but no softer. "Young women mistake grit for grace," she said. "Don't let work make you hard." "My work makes things softer," I replied. "Cooler roofs, warmer rooms, lower bills." "I don't mean HVAC," she said with a smile. "Ryan's life is complicated. A certain kind of woman helps a man like him move through rooms. You're admirable, Elena, but not effortless." I looked at the ocean, swallowing the moon, and thought of my father's hands, sandpaper, and tenderness in the same gesture. "Effortless," I said, "is often funded." Her smile sharpened. "Exactly." When Ryan drove us home, the air inside the car was thinner than the night outside it. He apologized until the word broke. I told him it was fine. It wasn't. What hurt wasn't his mother's sentence, it was his silence beside it. 3 nights later, he flew to Paris with Vivian for what he called a reset. He sent photos of bridges and pastries, and finally a picture of a ring in a window with the caption, "Someday." I texted back a heart and booked a breakfast meeting with Grace Tan. Grace is the kind of woman Vivian might have liked if she hadn't built herself from zero. She owns half the skyline between San Diego and San Francisco and dresses like a thunderstorm on purpose. We met at a coffee shop crowded with contractors. "You're good," she said, flipping through my portfolio like a deck of winning cards. "Your drawings think about people before they think about permits. That's rare." "Thank you. I've got a consortium looking to back female-led firms. If you're ready to grow, I'll put your name in front." "Ready," I said, and surprised myself with how solid the word felt. "Then incorporate," she said. "Separate your art from your life. Keep your books clean. And Elena, let them underestimate you as long as you don't." I filed the paperwork the next day. V Studio Design Group, V for Vargas, V for Victor, V for the shape your hands make when you hold something fragile and refuse to drop it. Ryan returned a week later, polished by Paris. We met at a small wine bar where the tables were too close for honesty. He looked beautiful, of course he did, and nervous in a way that made me sad instead of angry. "My mom, she has concerns," he began. "About fit, about trajectory." He said trajectory like it had been taught to him recently. "I think we should slow down." He pushed a velvet box across the table as if it contained closure. The box was the same blue as the ocean under Vivian's balcony. I closed it gently and slid it back. "Thank you for the honesty," I said. "My father used to tell me you can judge character by how someone returns what they can't use." Ryan exhaled in relief. "You're so reasonable." I smiled because it was kinder than laughing. "I draft for a living," I said. "I erase too." He nodded, already half gone. When I stepped outside, the air was clean with endings. Somewhere behind me, a violinist started to play, and it sounded exactly like a door closing. I walked to my office, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the email from Grace's paralegal. The retainer agreement waited like a dare. I signed where it said CEO. The pool of light on the table felt like a spotlight, and I realized I didn't need an audience to perform strength. That night, V Studio Design Group existed only as a folder in a drawer and a name on a letterhead. But it was also the first wall of the future I would build, the blueprint of how I'd stop asking rooms to let me in and start creating rooms that didn't require permission to enter. When I finally lay in bed, I thought about the dinner, the chandelier hum, Vivian's smile, the way Chloe's fork scraped china like punctuation. I replayed every line, every pause, until one truth stood out clean as a draft line in ink. They had measured me with the wrong ruler. And when you're measured by the wrong ruler, the only logical thing to do is design your own. Chapter 2: The Engagement Collapse. The thing no one tells you about heartbreak is how ordinary it feels. The city doesn't stop. The light still comes in through the blinds at 8 a.m., even if you don't want it to. Your hands still know what to do. Mine kept drafting lines clean, corners true, while the rest of me became a demolition site behind caution tape. I let work be the hard hat. It fit better than grief. Grace called the following Monday. I sent your name to a few investors. She said, her tone brisk, businesslike, but I could hear the quiet note of checking in. You'll start hearing from them this week. 3 days later, I was back in the world of conference rooms and polite rejection. The first investor looked at my models the way someone looks at a puppy, fond, not serious. The second, a man who wore his MBA like a medal, told me my sustainability numbers were cute. I thanked him and left before I could weaponize my smile. The third meeting felt like oxygen. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. A mid-sized fund run by women who didn't just read the executive summary, they read the energy model. We spent 2 hours talking about embodied carbon and cost per lumen savings. When I showed them the prototype for modular green facades, they leaned forward. When they said we'll be in touch, I believed them. That night, I moved my drafting table closer to the window. I placed my father's old plane on the sill, a little rusted, a lot honest. I bought a plant I had no business keeping alive and kept it anyway. It had been 2 months since Ryan's trajectory speech. He'd texted twice. The first time he said he missed me. The second, "Can we still be friends?" I typed. No deleted it typed. Maybe someday deleted that too. Then I put the phone in the freezer for 10 minutes. Cold, slow swelling, and I needed my heart to stop inflaming itself. When I took it out, I didn't text anything at all. I didn't need closure. I needed structure. Grace knew. She never said it out loud, but she started looping me into bigger conversations, city contracts, policy roundtables, names that made other people nervous. She was testing my bandwidth and my backbone. One morning, she slid a folder across the cafe table. Harbor District Revive, she said. State-backed redevelopment. They're turning abandoned docks into housing and retail. It's huge, messy, political. Everything good architecture should be. I flipped through renderings from other firms, shiny towers pretending to be progress. Who's leading the bid? Applications open next week. I'll handle the developer side if you lead design. What about a builder? We'll need one big enough to handle a small city. She sipped her espresso lipstick unbothered. And preferably one that plays well with female leadership. Those are rarer than blueprints without revisions. I smirked. We'll find someone. She nodded. Elena, don't design to impress, design to endure. I started sketching that night. The docs became bones in my hands, long, weathered, patient. I drew a promenade that didn't separate tourists from tenants. I tucked daycare centers into ground floors and built staircases beautiful enough to make elevators jealous. I made the roofs earn their keep with solar panels and gardens that would grow into quiet proof that function could be graceful. The plan unfolded over weeks. I slept better when I drew. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass late at night, hair pulled back, eyes steady, and think, this is what resilience looks like before it's celebrated. When the proposal was finally ready, I wore my father's watch to the submission meeting and my mother's sense of humor. The state portal crashed twice during upload like it was testing my patience. When it went through, I whispered, "We're in." We waited. During those weeks, my firm grew from a dream in a drawer to an office with 3 employees and one painted wall, the color of possibility, harbor blue. That same week, Chloe liked a photo of our office on Instagram, then unliked it 3 minutes later. The internet's version of peeking through curtains. I smiled and kept working. 2 months passed before we got the call back. We'd been shortlisted with 2 other firms. I didn't recognize either of the competing architects until I saw the Wilmore Group listed under construction partners. Grace noticed my face. "Problem not professionally." She tilted her head. "Then good. Let it sting just enough to sharpen you." The presentation was held in a government building that smelled like old coffee and bureaucracy. The panel looked like a quilt of officials, half curious, half calculating. I talked about shade at 3 p.m. in August, about how parks can teach patience, about the sound of basketballs echoing through safe neighborhoods. When someone asked how we'd prevent gentrification, I didn't reach for policy jargon. I drew lease caps, community ownership clauses, a city that couldn't be bought out from under its people. When I finished, one board member said softly, "This feels like it belongs to everyone." "That's the idea," I said. We walked out into blinding sunlight. Grace slipped on her sunglasses and smiled. "You didn't flirt with the budget," she said. "And somehow the budget still likes you." 3 weeks later, the state announced the finalists. We were in the top 2. I poured coffee for my team and told them to take a breath. "The hard part starts when we win," I said. That night my phone rang. Ryan Wilmore. I let it go to voicemail, then played it twice before calling back. "Hey," he said softly. "Chloe told me you're leading Harbor. That's huge." "It is," I said. "I'm in London now. Work's fine. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not saying something that night, for thinking silence would keep the peace." "Silence is still a sentence," I said. "It just ends faster." He laughed quietly without joy. "You always had better words than me." "I'm better with drawings," I said, and hung up before nostalgia could start lying. 3 months later, we won. The subject line of the email read, "Notice of Intent, V Studio Design Group." I stared at it until the words blurred. Intent. I liked that word. It sounded like both confession and promise. Grace called within minutes. "We did it," she said. "And the city just released the list of approved construction partners." I braced myself. "Let me guess. Wilmore Construction made the pool." I closed my eyes. "Politics." "Sure," she said. "But remember, politics builds bridges too. Sometimes the ones you walk across." A week later, I toured Wilmore's fabrication yard with a labor inspector who didn't care about last names. The crews were efficient, diverse, careful. I saw apprentices treated like assets, not burdens. One woman, Lonnie, ran the safety briefing with such precision that I caught myself smiling. Grace asked later, "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I hate that they're qualified," I admitted. "Pick the team that can build your conscience," she said, "even if they once bruised your pride." When the final selection committee opened the anonymous bids, we scored them on merit, timeline, cost, safety. When the envelopes came off, the winner was the one I least wanted to see. "Wilmore Construction," the chair announced. For a moment, I stared at the name and felt the past flicker. Then I signed the approval memo with a steady hand. Sometimes revenge isn't rejection, it's collaboration under your terms. The ink dried fast. And for the first time since that dinner, I didn't feel like something they could measure. I felt like the ruler. Chapter 3: The Build and the Betrayal. 6 months later, the sound of construction replaced the sound of heartbreak. By the time the first excavators clawed into the ground at Harbor District, my company had grown into something that required 2 receptionists, a payroll system, and a schedule that no longer cared about weekends. The project had become the pulse of my days, steady and relentless. On kickoff morning, fog rolled off the ocean and draped itself over the site like a benediction. A white tent flapped at the edge of the pier, full of city officials, developers, journalists, and too much coffee. The sign behind the podium read, "Harbor District Revive Building Tomorrow's Coast." I stood in a new hard hat that still smelled of packaging plastic. My boots were worn but polished. Grace adjusted her blazer and leaned toward me. "You ready as I'll ever be," I said. "Good," she murmured. "Because she's here. I didn't need to ask who. I saw Vivian Wilmore the way you sense weather before you see the clouds." She moved through the crowd like a tide in pearls, shaking hands, posing for photos, making people feel noticed and graded at the same time. "Elena," she said when we finally met eyes. "What a surprise." "Mrs. Wilmore," I said evenly. "Thank you for coming." Her gaze dropped to my badge. "Chief Architect," she repeated as if tasting a foreign word. "Of record," I said, "though I prefer Elena on site." "Of course," she replied, smile precise. When the speeches began, Grace handled politics while I handled vision. I spoke about architecture as accountability, how buildings outlive promises. Cameras clicked. The mayor said something about innovation. Then we all posed with shovels that had never met dirt. When the photographers left, the work began. Construction sites are ecosystems of noise, the beep of reversing trucks, the whine of rebar saws, the staccato beat of hammers that keep time better than any orchestra. Our offices became a row of gray trailers facing the ocean. Inside, whiteboards overflowed with timelines and colored tape. My team taped up drawings like prayers, plans, elevations, details, each one an offering to precision. Every Tuesday, we held progress meetings. Every Wednesday, we put out fires no one could name. Every Friday, someone ordered pizza at midnight because design never sleeps. Then 2 weeks after groundbreaking, the past walked in with a clipboard. "Elena," he said. It took me a second to place the voice because I hadn't heard it outside memory. Ryan stood at the trailer door wearing a white hard hat with the Wilmore logo and a shirt that still had folding lines. "Ryan," I said, steady. I didn't realize Wilmore assigned staff yet. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. "Assistant project manager," he said, holding up his badge like proof. "I'm here for coordination." "Good," I said. "You'll want to meet Jessie. She runs scheduling." "Around here, schedule is God." He smiled small and real. "Copy that." The first week was strange, not painful, just surreal. Seeing him take notes during my briefings, double-check RFIs, walk the site beside supervisors, it was like watching a past version of myself walking through new blueprints. We were courteous, distant, professional. Vivian, however, was neither courteous nor distant. She attended our executive meetings in tailored neutrality, asking about budgets and alternates with a tone that could peel paint. She didn't address me directly unless protocol demanded it. I returned the courtesy. It was an elegant war of silence, and I was fluent. The first true battle came over steel. Wilmore proposed a substitution that saved money but weakened the energy performance we'd promised the city. Their engineer claimed the thermal loss could be offset elsewhere. "It's acceptable variance," he said during a tense afternoon call. "It's a structural compromise," I replied. "If you start a building by teaching it to give up, don't be surprised when it collapses on schedule." Grace tapped her pen against the table, half amused, half proud. I think the architects made her position clear. The engineer pushed again. The public won't see the difference. They'll feel it, I said. In their utility bills, in their summers. The conversation ended in stalemate. That night, Ryan knocked on my trailer door. Found a supplier willing to hold price on your original spec, he said. If we confirm delivery by Friday. I looked at him for a long second. Why are you telling me? Because you're right, he said simply. And I like buildings that stay honest. He handed me the card. I called the supplier. The deal held. The steel stayed pure. The budget survived. When I thanked him later, he only shrugged. You'd have done the same for me, he said. No, I replied softly. I would have defended you at dinner. He didn't answer, but the silence felt different this time, less cowardly, more penitent. 2 months into construction, the media began circling again. A journalist from Coastal Ledger wanted to cover the project's labor practices. The Wilmore name still carried a shadow from a decade-old scandal about unpaid apprentices. They'd settled and rebranded, but the ghost lingered. The reporter asked for quotes. I didn't give her gossip. I gave her data. I walked her through our safety protocols, our worker mentorships, our audit logs. When the article came out, the headline read, Modern Ethics at Harbor Revive, How V-Studio's Standards Are Reshaping Old Giants. My name appeared in the first paragraph, Vivian's in the second. At the next board meeting, Vivian placed the newspaper on the table like a body. Your standards, she said, voice cool, are expensive. They're economical, I replied. If you count beyond ribbon cuttings, her eyes narrowed. Legacy projects are built on relationships, Ms. Vargas. Exactly, I said. And keeping promises is a relationship. Grace chuckled softly. Motion to keep our integrity intact, she said. The board voted 7-5 to maintain the current specifications. Vivian abstained. When the meeting adjourned, Ryan lingered by the hallway. My mother isn't used to losing votes, he said quietly. I'm not used to winning them, I replied. We're both adjusting. He smiled faintly. She'll respect the outcome. We'll see, I said. 2 weeks later, the outcome arrived in email form. Wilmore Construction had been demoted from primary contractor to joint status with a firm specializing in workforce development. Both Vivian and Grace had signed off. No announcement, no press release. Just a quiet transfer of authority, a professional mercy disguised as an administrative note. The next evening, Ryan knocked again, this time at sunset. The site glowed amber. The air smelled like steel and salt. I'm being reassigned, he said. Hospital project in Bakersfield. They're calling it a promotion. That's convenient, I said. He laughed once dry. Strategic retreat, more like. He looked around my trailer, the sketches pinned to the wall, the half-empty coffee cups, the ghost of late nights. You always made spaces feel like they were waiting for people, he said. Even before they existed. That's the job. Also life, he said, then hesitated. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand both. I nodded. There was nothing left to forgive that time wouldn't already dilute. When he left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear into the dust. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone named Wilmore. A month passed. The project rose floor by floor. The sound of progress replaced the memory of insult. The harbor skyline began to change steel beams against sunlight like punctuation marks in a sentence the city was finally finishing. Then one night, as I reviewed change orders, Grace forwarded an email with no comment. The subject line read, Application Assistant Project Coordinator V Studio Design Group. I opened it. Name Ryan Wilmore. Experience Project Management Logistics Site Coordination. Objective to contribute to a company that builds with conscience, not convenience. His cover letter was short, professional, unassuming. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention his family. Only one sentence stood out. I want to learn the work the way you do it here. I stared at the screen for a long time. Outside, the cranes blinked red over the harbor like slow heartbeats. Grace's message below was only 2 words. Your call. I didn't reply that night. I closed my laptop, turned off the desk light, and stood in the doorway of my office looking at the drawings pinned across the walls, lines that had started as hope and turned into horizon. Sometimes revenge isn't public or loud. It's measured in quiet applications, humble signatures, and lessons absorbed without humiliation. I left the trailer, walked to the dark site until my boots were powdered with dust, and watched a worker welding in the distance, sparks rising like stars, trying to reattach themselves to the sky. In that light, everything felt possible again. I didn't know whether I'd hire him, but for the first time since that dinner, the idea didn't sting. It simply fit. Because maybe this was the truest form of redemption, not watching someone fall, but watching them learn to build. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. 3 months passed before Ryan's email turned into a desk with his name on it. He joined V Studio quietly, no announcement, no favors. His resume had gone through HR like any other applicant, his references verified by people who didn't care that his mother once owned half the coastline. He started at the bottom of the coordination chain, reporting to Jesse, the most meticulous project manager I'd ever hired, and conveniently the least impressed by pedigrees. For the first month, Ryan said little. He arrived early, logged field reports, scheduled deliveries, and ran cross-team calls with the kind of diligence only someone trying to unlearn privilege could muster. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't bring up the past, and never once said my name with hesitation. He simply worked. And strangely, that was what disarmed me the most. On site, he kept pace with foremen and interns alike. He carried rebar samples, checked weld points, fetched coffee for crews without prompting. At the end of each week, he stayed late to double-check punch lists with Jessie, learning her shorthand like a new dialect. I could tell she respected him by the way she stopped correcting his reports. Grace noticed, too. He's either here to rebuild something or bury it, she said one afternoon as we reviewed timelines. Maybe both, I answered. The project itself was beginning to breathe. The first buildings reached their 3rd floors, concrete forming into silhouettes that hinted at the finished skyline. The smell of sawdust and salt air mixed with optimism. For the first time in years, the harbor site sounded like progress instead of penance. Then the second Coastal Ledger article hit. The journalist, the same one who had praised our ethical standards, came back with a deeper story, one that compared our apprenticeship intake to the city's baseline and charted the ripple effect across the construction sector. The numbers were undeniable: worker retention up 22%, incident rates down 40%, minority apprenticeship enrollment doubled. But the piece didn't stop there. It traced those changes back to a culture shift led by V Studio's founder-architect Elena Vargas, whose quiet insistence on integrity has forced legacy contractors to modernize or step aside. Vivian's name appeared 2 paragraphs later, framed less flatteringly. That night, Grace called. You saw it, I did. She's going to call a meeting. I know. She'll come armed with 12 polite insults. I'll bring 13 polite facts. The emergency board session was scheduled for Friday afternoon. The conference room was glass-walled, perched above the harbor like a watchtower. Outside, cranes moved like patient giants. Inside, tension smelled faintly of perfume and printer ink. Vivian arrived last, elegant in navy, her hair swept into an apology she'd never say aloud. She placed a copy of the newspaper on the table, headline up. Reputation, she began, is an ecosystem. It can take decades to cultivate and seconds to flood. Grace leaned back unbothered. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. The article was accurate. It was unbalanced, Vivian said. Our company's past was contextual, not criminal. And this, she tapped the paper, reduces complexity into sound bites. When it was my turn, I said, buildings are stories too. You can decorate a lobby and call it redemption, but if the foundation's cracked, the story still collapses. We're not rewriting history, Mrs. Wilmore. We're ensuring it doesn't repeat. Vivian's gaze met mine, tired, sharp, but not cruel. You think you're fixing us. I think I'm fixing a project, I replied softly. What it does to your family, that's your renovation. A pause. Grace's eyes flicked between us like a referee deciding whether to interfere. She didn't. Vivian closed her folder slowly. The public forgets fast, she said. But architects leave evidence. Yes, I said. That's the point. No vote was taken. None was needed. The silence afterward was its own verdict. That night I went home and poured a glass of wine I didn't finish. I stood at my apartment window and watched the city shimmer in the distance, each light an argument for trying again. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding the last 3 years until my shoulders started to ache from letting go. Ryan must have noticed because the next morning he knocked on my trailer door with 2 coffees and a smile that no longer looked uncertain. My mother read the article, he said. I assumed. She said you didn't feed it to the press. I didn't. She knows. And she knows you could have. I took a sip of coffee. I don't win by telling on people, Ryan. I win by making the thing right. That's why I'm here, he said quietly. To learn the thing. It was the first time he'd said anything about learning instead of earning. It mattered. Over the next few weeks, he proved it. He handled vendor disputes without escalation, negotiated equipment rentals that saved us $20,000, and once stood up for an apprentice when a senior foreman dismissed her for being too academic. He didn't grandstand, he just corrected the record and moved on. The crew respected that. So did I. Then on a Thursday in late spring, the wind turned mean. A storm pushed inland faster than the forecast predicted. By noon, the rain felt horizontal. By 2, one of the roof membranes had torn loose, flapping dangerously close to the scaffolding. I was halfway across the site when I heard the shout, Ryan's voice sharp and calm at once. Lonnie, take crew 3. Cut power to grid section B. By the time I reached them, the crisis had been handled. The team moved like choreography, 3 crews, 1 motion. The torn section was secured without injury, without panic. No one cheered. Professionals don't. They checked each other's helmets, shared nods, and went back to work. Later in the report, the event was labeled near miss resolved, but I wrote something else in my notes, proof of change. That evening, my inbox held a single email from Vivian. No greeting, no sign-off, just 1 sentence. Your standards have been costly, they have also been correct. I read it twice, then replied with 3 words my father would have approved of. Thank you. Proceed. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming about unfinished foundations. 2 weeks later, Chloe appeared in my office doorway carrying a notebook and the same cautious smile she'd worn the night I first met her. I'm writing an article, she said, handing me a press badge. Not gossip. A profile series, Women Who Build. My editor wants you for the opener. I don't do profiles, I said automatically. It's not about fame, she said. It's about footprint. I studied her. She was different, still stylish, still careful, but softer somehow, like she'd started sanding down her own edges. Off the record, she continued, my mother's changing. She won't say it, but she is. She moves vases around and calls it renovation, but she's watching you. Learning. She doesn't have to learn from me, I said. The site's full of teachers. Chloe hesitated. I was cruel that night at dinner. I thought class was something you could inherit. You've made it look like a verb. That earned her a real smile. Apology accepted, I said. Just make sure your article uses fewer adjectives than her compliments. She laughed the same way her brother used to and promised it would. By the time summer leaned into autumn, Harbor District began to resemble the renderings. The park glowed under new lampposts. The daycare windows had tiny handprints from site visits. The promenade curved toward the water like an invitation. The second builder's workforce program exceeded every benchmark, and Wilmore Construction matched them step for step. Pride had become collaboration. Competition had evolved into integrity. Vivian stopped attending the weekly meetings but started sending small notes through Grace, questions about specifications, suggestions about community sponsorships, even a donation receipt for the apprenticeship fund we'd founded in Victor's name. She didn't sign them, but she didn't need to. The handwriting was enough. One afternoon, as I walked past the first completed courtyard, I saw Ryan sitting on a low retaining wall, eating a sandwich and watching a tree we'd planted too small now throw its first meaningful shadow. You were right about the stairs, he said as I approached. People take them without noticing. That's how you know they're good, I said. Effort that feels effortless. He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I was wrong about a lot of things. Most of them weren't mine originally. I borrowed them. I'm returning them. Keep the ones that still work, I said. Throw away the rest. He smiled, sunlight glinting off his hard hat, working on it. When I got back to my office, Chloe's article draft was waiting in my inbox. The title stopped me. Grace, Grit, and Blueprints: How One Architect Built More Than Buildings. I opened it expecting flattery. What I found instead was accuracy. It talked about design as empathy, leadership as structure, and revenge as transformation. At the end, Chloe wrote she didn't rebuild to prove anyone wrong. She rebuilt so the next woman wouldn't need to. I sent her one line back, publish it. That evening, Grace came by with champagne she insisted was for structural integrity testing. We sat on the trailer steps watching the sun sink behind cranes. You did it, she said. We did, I corrected. She tilted her glass toward the skyline. Feels different when revenge tastes like redemption, doesn't it? Better for the digestion, I said. We laughed. Vivian attended the soft opening that fall. She came alone, dressed in understatement. The crowd was small: city officials, local families, a few journalists. She stood by the fountain we'd designed to sound like rain on a porch roof and listened. When she finally approached, she said, "We'll be doing business your way from now on." "That's the project's way," I replied. "It'll outlast us both." Her eyes softened. "I should have seen you for what you are, not wife material. Foundation material." She almost laughed at herself. "You were the blueprint all along." "Sometimes the blueprint is a mirror," I said gently. "We don't always like the reflection until we've changed the frame." She nodded once, as if settling an internal debt, and walked away toward the sound of construction still humming somewhere down the pier. As the last workers packed up, I stood at the edge of the water, wind in my hair, salt on my lips. For the first time since that dinner, the silence around me felt earned. The reckoning hadn't been loud or vengeful. It had been methodical, patient, built beam by beam from everything they once underestimated. And maybe that's the truest kind of power, the kind that rebuilds the world quietly, while everyone's still arguing about whether you belong in it. Chapter 5: The Karma of Quiet Power. 520 words rewritten for cinematic emotional release continuity and the proof not rage CTA tone. The morning of the ribbon cutting smelled like sea air and fresh paint. Harbor District shimmered under early light, the new promenade glinting as if the ocean itself approved. The buildings that had once been lines on my screen were now glass and steel and shade, standing exactly as we'd promised they would. 2 years of blueprints, debates, meetings, and mercy had finally hardened into something real. V Studios' team gathered under a long white canopy beside the market hall. The city had set up microphones and a table of pastries that would go untouched. Behind us, children chased each other across the new park, their laughter echoing off the walls we'd once argued about in conference rooms. Grace Tan, immaculate as ever in a storm gray suit, checked her notes. Press from 5 outlets. Local TV's running it live, she said. The mayor will speak first, then you, then the ceremonial ribbon. Perfect, I said, adjusting my badge. She smiled. You always did prefer an ending that could double as a beginning. Ryan stood nearby in a Navy V Studio polo, coordinating last-minute logistics with Jesse. His hard hat was tucked under his arm. The badge on his chest bore only his first name. No one here cared about his last one anymore. You're nervous, Grace teased him. Just organized, he said. Same thing she replied. Vivian hadn't arrived yet. Grace glanced toward the parking lot. Do you think she'll come? She will, I said. People always show up for closure, even when they call it curiosity. The mayor's assistant gave the signal. The speeches began. The mayor thanked the taxpayers, the developers, and the visionary women who turned these docks into a district. I stepped to the podium, next wind playing with my hair camera shutters clicking. When I first drew this project, I didn't design for awards. I designed for the people who'd live here, the nurse walking home at dusk, the child running toward light, the mother counting every dollar of rent. We built Harbor District, not to impress the skyline, but to serve the ground it stands on. Applause scattered like pebbles tossed into water. I saw Ryan smiling in the second row. Grace nodded once, satisfied. Then, as if the universe had been waiting for her cue, Vivian appeared at the edge of the crowd. She wore navy understated elegant, her armor made softer now. She stood still for a long moment, then moved forward and took a seat in the second row. When the ribbon was cut, a cheer rolled across the promenade. The vendors in the market hall opened their stalls for the first time. A teenage boy with a borrowed pair of scissors grinned into 3 television cameras, his face bright with the kind of pride that has nothing to do with money. The ceremony ended, and people began to drift toward the food stalls. I was halfway through shaking hands when Vivian approached. Beautiful work, she said quietly. Thank you. I have a favor to ask. I raised an eyebrow. She gestured to the microphone still on the podium. May I? Grace hesitated. I nodded. Go ahead. Vivian climbed the small step and faced the crowd, wind teasing her hair. Her voice when she spoke was calm and steady, stripped of the old hauteur. My family once believed class was something you bought, she said. Today I learned that class is what you build. We didn't hire Elena Vargas, she hired us into a better way of working. She was always wife material, I just wasn't vision material. For a second, no one breathed. Then applause broke out, not thunderous, but genuine. She stepped down before anyone could mistake vulnerability for performance. When she reached me again, she said softly, Thank you for not embarrassing me when you could have. I don't get paid in humiliation, I replied. I get paid in shade and roofs that don't leak. Her laugh was small, but real. Then let me pay my part. I'd like to fund the apprenticeship scholarships under your firm's name. Only if your company contributes too, I said. Shared foundation. Done, she said. For the first time, her handshake felt human. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ryan found me beneath the wisteria arch that framed the courtyard. The flowers hadn't bloomed yet, but their green promise coiled gently around the beams. I told my mother I work for you, he said. She knows, I said. She just proved it to the entire city. He smiled. She said she's glad. How do you feel? Like my job finally fits my name, he said. Or maybe the other way around. I don't want to be the story anymore. I want to be the scaffolding. Scaffolding's beautiful, I said. When it comes down, people forget it ever held them up, but without it, nothing would stand. He looked out toward the promenade where a little girl was dragging her mother toward a fountain shaped like a spiral shell. Do you ever think about the balcony, he asked. Sometimes, I said, mostly when I need to remember why I started drawing. He nodded. My mother said she hopes one day you'll let her buy you dinner, not to apologize, to listen. We'll see, I said. Forgiveness is like renovation, you do it room by room. Grace walked over her heels, clicking against the new stone. Sentimental hour, she asked mock stern. Closing remarks, I said. Good, she replied. Because you've got a press interview in 10? Of course I do. When she left, I glanced back at the market hall. A violinist had begun to play near the entrance, his case open for coins. The melody wound through the air light and steady. A boy asked his father why the ceiling curved like waves, and the father answered, because the architect wanted the ocean to follow us inside. I smiled. My father would have loved that. He would have tapped the wall, listened for echo, and asked if the screws were tight. In my office overlooking the harbor, a photo of him sits on the shelf, Victor Vargas pencil behind his ear sawdust in his smile. Beside it, a small frame holds a piece of paper from years ago, creased and yellowed. The words are simple, "You're not exactly wife material. I used to keep it as proof. Now I keep it as blueprint." A reminder of how to draft different endings. As the sun began to drop behind the cranes, the promenade filled again. The vendors called to each other. A mother bought her child ice cream. A couple posed under a lamppost that hadn't existed 2 years ago. Life was already using what we built. That's the secret goal of every architect, to become invisible once the work is done. Ryan joined me on the overlook balcony. You ever going to take a vacation, he asked. Maybe, I said, but I like this view too much. He followed my gaze across the water. You know, karma doesn't always swing like a hammer, he said. No, I agreed. Sometimes it builds quietly, brick by brick. We stood in silence, watching the light shift over the rooftops. The air felt heavy with completion. After a while, Grace came up behind us. One last photo for the city archives, she said, holding her phone. Stand still, I did. Ryan stepped aside, but Grace gestured him back in. The shutter clicked. Later, when I looked at the picture, I noticed something, my reflection in the glass behind us, framed by the skyline we had built. It didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. That night, I walked the market hall alone. The shops were closed, lights soft and golden. My heels echoed against the tile. Every doorway smelled like something different, coffee soap would. I stopped in front of the mural painted on Building C, a neighborhood in color arms, raised eyes forward, the caption reading, "We waited, we built, we belong." A janitor sweeping nearby nodded to me. You, Elena, yes. He grinned. Nice work. My daughter got one of those apprenticeships, first one in the family to wear a hard hat. My throat tightened. Tell her I said congratulations. He chuckled. I already did. I walked out to the promenade again. The ocean was dark now, breathing slow against the docks. Street lamps glowed in even intervals, our design down to the last watt. I leaned on the railing, let the wind catch my hair, and finally felt the story settle. People think revenge is fire, but sometimes it's water. It reshapes everything it touches without shouting. It polishes what was jagged, cools what once burned, and carves new paths for whoever comes next. I didn't need them to love me. I just needed the skyline to stand. I whispered to the waterproof, not rage. The lights flickered across the surface like applause. If you've ever been measured by the wrong ruler, don't waste your life proving the scale is broken. Build something that outlasts their doubt. Let your proof be quiet, solid, and undeniable. Because revenge isn't destruction, it's reconstruction done with grace, integrity, and time. And sometimes when the world finally stands under the shade you built, it whispers what they once denied. She was never wife material. She was blueprint material.